So Paul, welcome, and thanks very much for attending. So do you want to say a couple of words to introduce yourself?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm probably the longest serving member of Encosi UK. I was there at the original launch meeting in
30 years ago this year,
1994.
Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, 94. But yes, I had a long and varied career in systems engineering day jobs. But towards the end, I started to step back from active project engineering management and focus on trying to bring on the next generation of systems engineers, developing some training courses for in-house delivery. Then after I retired, delivering some training either off my own back or through PPI, the Australian market leaders. And I'm still doing it, but by no means full time. And if that wasn't enough, when Jon came up with the idea of these short don't panic guides, so anybody who's seen them, they're less than 60 pages, and I thought that is an absolutely brilliant idea. That really hits what the market wants, because even if there is a big mighty tome out there, who in a day job has got time to read it? But they have got time to read a 60-page book that's got the essentials and is full of pictures. So I've had a go at writing two of those. First one on interface engineering management, and this one on system integration and test.
And I think, Paul, after our first, so the first Don't Panic was the MBSE one. That was the experiment one written by myself and Simon. And I think you were our first proper sort of a Don't Panic guide. And gosh, how long ago was that now? 4 years ago?
Oh, no, a bit more than that. It was quite considerably pre-pandemic.
Was it pre-pandemic? Goodness me.
Yeah.
There's the thing. But we're here today to talk about your second Don't Panic guide. So, Paul, do you want to just give us a little bit of the background? You've hinted at the motivation for doing this, and you're absolutely right. It's really good when we get very well-established and respected engineers like yourself to leave a legacy as well, because you will be, I guess, at some point retiring, full-time retirement, and it's nice to have this legacy and to capture some of that sort of wealth of knowledge and experience that you've gained over the years. So do you want to just give us a little bit of background about the origin of the book and why you chose to write it, or also why on this subject?
Why this one? Because it gets a lot of high-level attention, because system integration and test is where all of the errors that are inherent in the requirements and in the design and implementation of systems suddenly become customer visible, which gets quite a deal of scrutiny from high-level business managers, finance managers. And the standard of practice leading up to the planning for the system integration and test in particular, and then the optimization and execution doesn't it, such that it doesn't cost an arm and a leg, I thought was a bit of a gap in the market, and as something that sets you on the right path quickly was worthwhile writing, because I was aware of several really long-winded treatments of the topic, and I thought, how can we abstract the most important lessons learned for the attention of the early to mid-career practitioner? So that's what it was about. And I'd like to say that in writing the first one on interface management, that one was relatively easy because there was so little published on the subject.
That was a real gap in the market, wasn't it, that one?
Yeah. This one had absolutely the opposite problem. There were any number of 500-page books on the subject, which were very prescriptive. And if you were a small company or a small project trying to make sense of it and try to follow everything in there, you'd be probably spending 4 times as much as you really needed to. Okay. So this tries to have a little content about tailoring what is really needed and best practice as well.
So
Okay.
what can somebody expect from reading your book then, Paul? Because obviously, like I say, it's a short overview, so it's not going to be here's a big set of different techniques that you can use to how to use them, because we simply don't have the space. So what can people expect when they read it?
Okay, well, I mean, it starts with, in common with most of the other Don't Panic guides, with introduction of the key concepts, the defined terms, if you like, using the icon for key concepts and the short single paragraph style of writing to introduce them. And then I'm talking about failure modes, what goes wrong in system integration and testing, and what are the root causes, and how should we be attacking that in planning. And then I go on to look at what's the business case for doing that, because it looks like you're spending an awful lot of money up front before you even go into the system integration and testing. But what is the likely return on investment? Readers with a bit of ammunition to fight against the finance guys with. You can't really write about system integration and test without referring back to requirements. So I've done a brutally cut down treatment of requirements, particularly from the point of view of making them testable. And then you have to do the hard bit, which is looking at different potential life cycle models and how to structure and sequence your system integration and test plan, what the influencing factors are, and how best to attack it depending on the nature of your particular project and system context. And then lastly, in effect, it's a treatment on metrics. It's how do we know how well we're doing? There's a bit of a byplay on how do we assemble the evidence? How do we put together all of the sequence of component testing, aggregate testing, whole system testing, in what kind of environments, simulated or real? How do we assemble that evidence base to give ourselves a bulletproof case for acceptance or release to market? And then when inevitably things start to go wrong in integration and testing, you've got whole loads of rework to do and replanning. Planning cycles fail to keep up with what's going on in the integration lab. So how can we measure progress different ways? I've got some external sources for that, which aren't necessarily in the rest of the literature. Okay, and then there's an appendix on what's different about doing an agile project. Yeah, it's a tricky one.
That's a potential powder keg, isn't it? The whole agile side of things. How do you go about? And I guess it applies to what you said about requirements as well. You've got something that's potentially a vast area, and you've got to mention it. How on earth do you go about condensing that down into essentially a couple of pages in what's already a short guide? What are the challenges involved in that?
Yes. There were several hard decisions I had to make in writing this one, because a lot of the INCOSE literature and the big weighty books talk about verification and validation, not just of your implemented system, but also verification and validation of requirements, verification and validation of your design elements. But I thought, no, I can't treat that and keep within the 60 pages. So I stuck to the testing of your step-by-step integration of a system. Likewise for agile, there's much better sources on agile processes, particularly as a reference to software. So I had to restrict myself to thinking about how is our integration sequences and metrics in particular different for agile projects, and not cover anything else. That was quite hard mentally. And I had a bit of help on that one from your colleague Stuart Jobbins, which
because hopefully we're going to be he's written a Don't Panic on Agile, so it's nice.
Excellent. Good.
It's nice to see the authors talking, which I think it brings me on to, this is a question I ask of all the people that write the books, and something that fascinates me personally, is the writing style. So for example, I write with my colleague Simon Perry, who's the series editor of this as well, who's responsible for how the books look and why they look so good. And when we write together, my writing style is very much single draft, bit of a sort of an outpouring from my brain onto paper. Obviously, we plan the books, we model the books, and we know the structure. But as soon as we got that, I just write, and it comes out in one draft. And whereas Simon very much more plans everything, and it's done over multiple iterations. So we got very different writing styles, and I'm fascinated by the way that people's heads work on this, because everybody's got their own style, and it's so different for many people. And you're an established author anyway, Paul. This is your second Don't Panic. And I think it's very different writing a Don't Panic guide. You've already kind of alluded to that. So what is your sort of writing style? How does your mind work, and what process you go through?
I always start with a mind map,
right,
of the topics that I want to address. Of course, very often that mind map evolves. But having it there on one page helps give you the big picture. What is it you're trying to put in the book, and what you're not trying to put in the book? I think the book proposal template that you put out is extremely helpful, because it asks the right questions. So beyond the mind map, I do need to put a bit of flesh on the bones and write a paragraph on what each topic is about, and then what belongs together. So how am I going to group the topics together into chapters? I give myself a page count target and a contents list target for each chapter. So I'm towards the Simon Perry end, I would guess, of the spectrum, in that I plan all that without writing a single word, and then wait for the feedback from you guys, from you and your reviewers on the book proposal first. But there has already been a bit of planning work gone into that, about what am I going to say and what am I not going to say. I, particularly on this topic, where Avner Engel has written a sort of definitive guide to system integration and test, but it's 687 pages. So what am I going to be able to fit into 56 or however many pages? And it's certainly not that much.
And it's also, and because of, like you've mentioned, the presentation style of the Don't Panic guides, there's a lot of graphics. It's big text. They're not. Yes. It's not very small font, very densely packed. We encourage the use of graphics and diagrams and so on. And so even though it might sound like a lot to people, but and I think one thing in common with all the authors, when we've asked them, they've said it's not so much what you put in the book, it's what you leave out when you're faced with something that's actually quite a small book. Is one of the different.
The other thing is that I always like to put one or two stretch topics into my books. I've had challenges. But this isn't really a Don't Panic Idiot's Guide, is it? But there are a couple of advanced topics in here. But you can't say everything you want to say about that. So make sure you've got good references for things that you would like to say, but there's no room, so that the readers have got some high quality external references to look at. So like James Towers and Alex Hazel's paper on using models in system testing, for example. Oh, plus the big books, of course. That's my writing style. Then I tend to try and finish a chapter at a time, rather than dotting about here and there. But I don't necessarily write it in the book chapter order.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, this book, I worked on the introduction chapter first, and then I did the requirements chapter, because that's a good place to, sorry, the failure modes chapter and the requirements chapter, because if you like, that gives you the fundamentals of the topics that you're trying to address at the back end of a project in integration and testing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wrote the agile chapter last because I probably know the least about it.
And what's a typical sort of writing session for you? Do you write it in bits, or do you spend a whole day? You know, just a couple of hours? What's your typical structure for writing in terms of your time?
Probably no more than 2 to 3 hours.
Right. Okay. So relatively short sort of
Yeah.
kind of writing.
Yeah. I might occasionally spend a whole day, but only if I'm on a roll.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And do you find it comes natural to your writing? Do you enjoy the whole writing process?
Yes. I mean, I had a lot of practice writing technical proposals in the day
Yeah.
job back in the day.
It's quite different though, isn't it? It's there's a bit more emotion and passion, and I think that comes out in your writing as well, Paul. There's you know, it's not. It's a potentially a very dry subject that I think you've described very, very well in this, because it doesn't come across. And I guess a lot of aspects of engineering are the same, but it doesn't come across that way. Unlike when you write a technical report where you almost want it to be sort of dry and emotionless.
Yeah.
We see quite a lot of your sort of enthusiasm come out in the writing, and there's clearly sort of emotion and passion there behind it.
Yeah. Certainly, I would imagine that a lot of readers will run through that early chapter on what goes wrong and why, and be mentally experiencing some of the same pain, saying, "Yep, I've seen that. Yep, I've seen
flashbacks.
that." Unpleasant flashbacks. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is not. They're not intended to be theoretical books. These the Don't Panic guides. The ideal is that they are based on pragmatic experience. Like, you're never going to get your requirements perfect. You're never going to get your integration sequences perfect or bulletproof. But it's what works. Okay, what works within a finite time scale is where we're aiming at.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. Now, in terms of we've been talking about the writing process. In terms of the if you like, almost like the mechanical aspects of the process. And so what happens is, so Paul comes up with this idea. He submits a proposal to Incosi UK. It comes to me as technical director, and then we allocate 3 reviewers. And so the first part of the review process is a bit like the paper review that we do in the ASIC, which I know you're very familiar with as well. But once it's got so Paul then puts in a proposal with the obviously a little bit about the structure and the content and what the books are about, intended audience. I then have a talk with the series editor, and we say, is it appropriate? Because sometimes we get proposals for a couple of different authors on exactly the same topic. So we have to make sure it's relevant for systems engineering. We have to make sure it's appropriate. And then the 3 reviewers give the proposals. Unlike the ASEC process, which is double blind, this is single blind to start with. So they know who the author is, because one of the key things that we want to do is to ensure that the author is an authority on the subject. So it's very important that the reviewers in this case do actually know who the author is. And once the initial review gets passed, and it might take a couple of iterations. In Paul's cases, in both cases, it's raced through the initial review process. But after that, and this is where it differs, the reviewers are kind of on your side. They're there once it's got past the proposal. They want it to be produced, and they're all for it, and they want it to be the best publication ever. And this can be quite difficult at times when you are an author, because you get feedback from people, and I don't know, you get very precious about your books, and I'm sure you feel in a similar way, at least, Paul. They become almost like your babies, and then somebody saying, "Oh, what about this? What about this?" So that's a big part of the process. But the reviewers' comments come from a good place, because they want it to be the best, the best book it can be, the best product it can be. So a bit of a sort of personal question now, Paul, but how do you cope with this? When you get feedback from the book, because you know, some people can't cope with it at all, others just wash off
Yeah.
the back. How do you cope with things like that?
Well, fortunately, I haven't had to do a major rewrite as a result of those comments.
Hmm.
The first book, the one on interfaces, there were a couple of things I quite strongly disagreed with, and I had a discussion with you about them, and we negotiated some that I would put in and some that, you know, I stuck to my guns. This one had a very interesting set of comments. The major point was that having sorted out what I wanted to say, one of the things we do try to do with the Don't Panic guides is to make them consistent with all of the INCOSE international literature. And that can be hard.
Because of course you hit the new handbook, didn't you? Halfway through writing.
In particular, I'd written it to be consistent with the 4th edition of the Systems Engineering Handbook and an earlier edition of the Guide to Writing Requirements. And some of the metrics stuff as well. But then in early 2023, I think it was just last year, a flurry of stuff came out from the after the INCOSE International Workshop in January, February. So there was an up issue of ISO 15288, an up issue corresponding to it of the 5th edition of the SE Handbook, and then 4 big new documents from the INCOSE Requirements Working Group, which were relevant: their Needs and Requirements Manual, the Guide to Writing Requirements, and the Guide to Verification and Validation. And I thought, I really can't contradict that one too much. But I hadn't gone through them in detail, but some of the reviewers spotted it and thought, you really need to make an effort to be compatible with the 5th edition of the handbook and in particular, the Guide to Verification and Validation and the Needs and Requirements Manual. So I had a good look, and that was over 1,500 pages of writing that I had to wade through, work out what was relevant and what wasn't. And there were a couple of things that I really disagreed with. So in this little book, I had to skate over a couple of them and do a bit of a fudge where I referred to the 4th edition in one part of the book and the 5th edition in another.
And that was interesting, because I remember when the comments came, and my initial reaction was, well, of course, we want to be referencing the latest version. When I spoke to you about it, and it was along the lines of, you said, no, but I actually prefer the one that's in the slightly older one. And so we got an unusual situation in your book where, like you say, you're actually referencing 2 different versions in different parts. Because, you know, one, and I think when you pointed it out to me, and I had a look, one was a lot more appropriate than the other in, you know, particular topic. So that was quite unusual.
So anybody considering it, don't think that writing a 60-page book is easy, because you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. It's like doing a project for a complex system where you've got to do legacy system integration. That's an exact analogy. And people will spot any incompatibilities and call you out for them. So in total, I must have at least skim read 2,500 pages of external references to do this 60-page book. I tried to make sense of the conflicts between what's out there. Go on, John.
So it's like I say, it's a surprising amount of effort, isn't it? And as you said, with these books, it's not only that, but it's getting across your considerable experience in the field as well. And I think that comes across. Very well. Now, another thing that, like I say, this is your second book. So, how did the writing experience compare to the first one? Did you find it easier with the second one, or simpler, or was it just completely different?
Okay, I'm going to go back And refer back to the similar interview you did with Jess 2 weeks ago. Jess is a very creative and imaginative writer, which I could kind of go there for the interfaces book because there wasn't much literature out there.
So
for the integration and testing book, I couldn't get too creative because there are so many reference texts out there. It had to be structured. It has to be disciplined, which is a different writing style. So in the interfaces one, you spend more time expanding on the ideas. In the integration and testing one, the ideas are already out there. So you just encapsulate them and structure them better than the 700-page books. Yeah. So that had a big influence on the writing style. Yeah. And as I've alluded to before, I find listening to classical music a big help while writing in a structured manner. Yeah. Not pop music or anything, or even though I'm big fan of pop and particularly rock and blues, but anything with distracting lyrics is going to destroy your train of thought. So having some highly structured classical music, Bach, Schubert, Haydn, old stuff, Beethoven at a push. In fact, I put a LinkedIn post about this out. There was a similar kind of discussion topic about 6 months ago, and I put avoid Shostakovich. And somebody who actually used to work for me in the day job but moved on like 20 years ago posted back, and I hadn't corresponded with him for like 20 years, and he said there should always be room for Shostakovich. And to which my answer was yes, but only if you want to write like Harold Pinter.
But arguably the most highbrow discussion there's ever been on LinkedIn. So
sorry about that.
it's all the people doing sponsored walks and pictures, isn't it? So what can we? You've mentioned to me when I've been talking to you. I remember when you wrote the first book, the interface management one, and shortly afterwards you said to me, right, I've got ideas for at least another 4 or 5 books now. So you still got more in you, Paul? You still got more books? If so, what sort of topics are we talking?
There's 2 that spring to mind, although I'm not sure I'm prepared to commit to them. But one is on metrics generally.
Okay, I think that would be an excellent one.
Yeah, and the other one, Rose Dixon, who you corresponded with, is strongly urging me to have a look at Philip McPherson's archives and on his value of systems engineering and the intangible value of the systems that we developed. I don't think that is suitable for a Don't Panic guide.
No.
In fact, I'm fairly sure it's not. But until I go down to those archives and have a look at it, I've got no idea what to do with it.
I haven't seen it face to face, but apparently it's significant as well, isn't it? Philip's contribution over so many years is volumes and volumes of work.
Yes, but they're more internal notes. He was not so good at completing, finishing, and publication. And a lot of his most valuable work, which I think might have been for Shell, they refused to let him publish anyway.
Right.
So his theory of intangible value of systems. So I think there's something there, but whether there's a market for it is another matter entirely.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to come up with a new series of books in that case, Paul. Some sort of historical,
You did have one on advanced applications, didn't you?
Yes, we got advanced, and that's another thing I was going to ask you. Is that do you think we can tempt you to write the the 500-page authoritative guide on one of these subjects?
It's a big investment of time, and I am actually going to have to retire sooner or later.
You keep threatening us with that, Paul. It's not happened so far.
Yeah, indeed. I know. I think my wife might have a big say in this matter.
So in terms of the sort of practicalities of the book, and I know you're heavily involved in training with PPI. I think Renee's here as well to keep a check on you. Is there, if people wanted training in this area, for example, do you tie this into your training courses as well? I know with your previous book, there's been an aspect.
It's no secret that I developed a 2-day training course for PPI off the back of the first book.
Yeah.
And it had a quite complicated ownership agreement, intellectual property agreement, where I said I can't, anything I developed in the foreground is the copyrighted and IP by me, released under license to PPI. But the background IP of the actual content of the book, I don't own. Encoding UK does. So we had a discussion where, yes, I can use that for training, but so can anyone else. Yeah. So I can't own or transfer copyright or even licensing for the copyright to anyone else. Yeah. So I might well do a 2-day one on the system integration and test, or perhaps a 1-day adjunct to the one on interfaces, because they are so intrinsically linked. You'd want to cover a lot of the same material.
So can you see the sort of connections between the books as well? So if you did write another one, can you see them all kind of working together? Obviously, you'd be the author. It makes sense if they all tied together. So can you see almost like joining the books together at some point?
By an integrated 3 or 4-day training course. Yes, I could indeed. Ideally, I might join it up with the Agile one and join it up with the one I particularly like is the Architectures and Architecting from Mike Wilkinson and Tim Roberts.
Yeah.
And they're all interrelated topics.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of part of the challenge of these books as well, is writing something in an interesting way, but also obviously with a degree of authority, but also putting your personal stamp on it and being able to express your opinion. So these books aren't intended to be, this is the the absolute definitive version of what this is. Obviously, it's got to be based on sound theory and, as you say, reference other things. But also, we want to see your kind of opinions come out of it as well. And I think that's interesting with a lot of the Don't Panic guides. And I know in your case that you've actually been talking to some of the other authors as well. I know that you've been talking to James and Alex, for example, because they're working on a more testing. And so it is, it's not as easy just to say, we'll make sure that all the books absolutely agree 100% with each other. Of course, we want there to be an underlying sort of consensus between them, but then different people have different opinions. And so, we will see slight discrepancies, should I say, at times, because the way that you interpret something and somebody else might, or based on your experiences in a particular domain and somebody else.
Yes. I mean, as well as being over 400 pages, the needs and requirements manual from the NCOSI requirements working group reads like, this is the gospel according to, and I'll say Lockheed Martin. I don't think it is Lockheed Martin, but certainly the NCOSI metrics guide is the gospel according to Lockheed Martin, which comes across as a bit preachy, and it's as dry as anything. You can't see individual flavors. It's almost, it has to be this way. You need to follow everything in this manual. Whereas what I try and do is get away from that and say, you don't have to do everything on every project. There's a little bit at the tail end of the requirements chapter here, which says, what is your customer acceptance model? Is it on? does it meet every letter of the spec, which is fine if you're working for a customer in Switzerland, for example, because that's the way they think. But if you're working with a customer of the Middle East, they haven't done their mission and operational analysis. Part of the reason they've come to you is that you're the experts and they expect you to interpret it right.
Mm.
But then at the end of the project, if it doesn't do what they want, they won't pay for it.
Yeah.
So what is the point of running your rigorous requirements traceability down 6 layers of your architecture? Because it's valueless. You just need to focus on your top 10 or top 20 user-oriented requirements and construct your validation planning around that. And so I'm saying, work out what is your acceptance model first. So I'll put a quote from my old colleague Dick Allen Challis in there saying, requirements are the things that you need to do and prove that you've done in order to get paid.
Yeah.
And that is so much more useful than the theoretical explanations of what a requirement is in all of the encoded texts.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. And like you say, so Mike Wilson and Timothy Rabbit's book on the architecture and architecting, again, you see, again, like yours, you see the personalities come out, you see the opinions come out on those. And that's what we're aiming for with these books.
Yeah.
We got a question from Paul Adams. First of all, some flattery, which I won't read out, so I know you're very modest, Paul. But he says, how long did it take in total to write the book, and which aspect or chapter of the book are you most pleased with? So, because I know it's, I don't mean this is bad, but it was quite a long time coming, this book as well. We had lockdown and so on. There was all sorts of going on. And plus as well, we have to bear in mind that you are semi-retired, so you're not working, full time on these things. So how long did it take together, Paul?
Yeah, that ought to make it easier, really, in that I'm not being interrupted by the day job, but I am being interrupted by going skiing and lots and lots of social life
must
stuff.
Be hell. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then I need to work for PPI to pay for the skiing trips. Because whilst I can live perfectly happy on my pension, that's above and beyond. I think it was a little over 2 years from the initial book proposal to actually getting it published. Maybe 2.5, because there's the turnaround time for the book proposal review, and there was quite a turnaround time for the final draft reviewers' comments and feedback. And I've got to give a strong mention to Simon Perry here, because he's a damn good editor. And gave me some very valuable comments even before it got to the external reviewers. But I'm saying 2.5 years, but probably a couple of 100 hours actual writing time. Yeah. And by writing time, I'm including reading time for all of the external references. Yeah, that'd be about right.
Okay, and which aspects of the book are you most pleased with as well, Paul?
That's a good one. Probably the bit about assembling the evidence, using Simon and James's evidence pattern from, or do you claim ownership of that, John? No, in MBSE notation, which is quite powerful. I have yet to see a good tool that would support that model, but I'd be interested in if anybody's got it. Because in there, we treat how do you work out how much testing you need to do. The idea of using evidence from lower level testing and not repeating it at higher level to minimize the cost and maximize the diagnostic capability of the testing at each level of the hierarchy. So that was the one that required the most thinking, and I hope that it comes across as a usable pattern.
Okay.
And that's not in any of the external references.
Yes, they will post it if they find.
Sorry, we just had a bit of. So, Paul, I've just had to unmute you. Can you unmute yourself, please? There we go.
You really did me.
So, sorry, we got a bit of background noise then from somewhere, so I had to mute everybody. So I do apologise. You just mentioned tools, then, and you said you'd be interested to see, potential tool implementations of things like you mentioned the evidence pattern in particular. So we got a question from my favourite Australian, Renee King here, who I think you might be familiar with, Paul.
She's not Australian.
And it's just the way she talks. And it says, how is integration test further complicated by multi-vendor development? So, and I think this is an interesting topic. And how do you propose we can address that?
Well, in the chapter on planning and sequencing, I do note that as you go through the integration testing in particular, you're going to need external simulators for everything that you haven't got.
Yeah.
And somewhere in there, there's some words as actually, if you see the need for those simulators coming and there's intellectual property involved, you're going to need to negotiate with the people at the other end in terms of providing the working model for those simulators from outside your organization. I think I cover that in the interfaces book as well. And then it's the what do you ask in the assembling the evidence chapter. It's about what do you accept from those suppliers in particular in a multi-vendor application as acceptable argument fuel in your evidence case, in your acceptance case. Yeah, so that is exactly the sort of thing that if you develop a multi-layer implementation of that evidence pattern is designed to address. Okay.
Yeah, good.
Hoping that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does very well. We got a suggestion from you from Luca Stringhetti for your next Don't Panic guide, and they're suggesting don't panic, how to survive without having 8 Zoom meetings a day and deliver a project anyway. So I think this is something you got quite a lot of experience in, Paul, delivering things. So
yes.
Time management, is that a pet subject of yours, or?
No, not really. Again, my wife says I'm the worst person in the world at managing my time. The strict 30, okay, there is fuel there. There's the strict 30-minute morning stand-up meetings where you only report by exception, and you expect to get the cane if you haven't corrected that by the following morning. And then there's the yes, it's about document reviewing. Yes, I've written a bit about that before, but that could be turned into something. Yeah, I require notice of that question because that is actually quite a good topic. I'm not sure I'm the best person to write about it, though.
Yeah. Okay, so so what's next for you in your life then, Paul, in the foreseeable future? We've mentioned we're trying to urge you to write more, but what else is on the horizon for you?
Well, Renee wants me to write the course based on this book, so that's one thing. I'm still running the Loughborough Group Systems Project module for the Masters, and I noticed that 1 or 2 of the students are on this call.
Did I get extra points then?
I'm turning that into a paper for this year's ASEC, I hope.
Good stuff.
What else? I don't know. I can paraphrase by saying the greatest thing about having published a book is that you're no longer writing a book.
Yeah, but then you're hungry for the next one.
Well, I'm hungry to do something, but you do need some relaxation time first.
Yeah, and so a bit more skiing. That's what you need in your life, Paul. So.
Well, I thought that until I switched to a snowboard for a day and cracked a rib. But yeah, I do have to acknowledge my age at some point.
Yeah. So there we go. Okay, well, we sort of just checking now. Lots of people saying thanks very much for an excellent talk and an excellent book. So the book is available from the Incozy UK website. So please do go and check it out. You can also buy Paul's other book there on interface management, and plus all the other Don't Panic guides, which are turning into, as you say, Paul, I'm pleased that you like the whole series. It's quite a series now. We've got about another 4 in the pipeline at the moment. So yeah, things are looking good. So please do go and check out the Incozy UK website. Have a look at Paul's books on there. Have a look at the other books. Paul, oh, hang on, we've got just a message coming in.
Yeah, just
another thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Look, this is what we want from Paul Adams. The book is on order. Thanks for the subliminal advertising, Paul Adams. Yeah. I'll pay you later, mate. But, there we go. And Paul, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks very much for making the time to come and talk to everybody. As we said, this will be available on the Incozy UK website hopefully in the next few weeks. And, you know, I'm sure everybody that's come and joined us would like to thank you as well. So again, thanks very much, Paul. I look forward to seeing you at the ASIC this year then.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Okay, thanks very much. Stay safe.